I can't help. I told you I'm a smart ass, so I can't help but be a little bit subversive. Okay, so Douro. When we created Douro, and I'm going to go through the deck in just a second, but the way that this restaurant was created is originally there was an idea of inside this building, we're footsteps away from the Eastern Promenade. We're right next to 12. We're also very close to the marina, which you can see right here has like numerous slips. It's actually one of the largest marinas that exist. It's actually one of the largest luxury marinas in the world. So we exist right here, and then we have this lovely boat that's right here too. That ultimately there's foot traffic that exists right here. And one of the things that we looked at is that there's so many different people who come to this area, right, for seafood. I will say I am not personally from Maine. And having existed even in New York City and in London, where you have access to incredible ingredients, the quality of ingredients that you find here with as little traffic as they need to make in order to go onto a plate is incredible. And the first time that I came here and I tried food and I was eating out, I was like, people don't know how spoiled they are here from the quality of both agriculture and aquaculture, because it just doesn't exist in a lot of US states, right? And that drives a lot of tourism, right? Like alongside the scenery, alongside the ocean, alongside some of the qualities that you get here, we as a city, the size population wise, punch above our weight in regards to food quality, right? I would even say that some of your second tier markets, not coming for you, Boston, sorry, Carrie, we actually have like a baseline of quality that sits quite high, right? In that, there's numerous people who are coming here to experience that same seafood, that aquaculture that I just referenced, right? And in it, a lot of times when you think of the East Coast, you think of oysters. You do, right? They're not everywhere. They exist on the West Coast. They exist on the East Coast. And we are very close to some of the key harvesting grounds of them. So originally the idea was an informal, casual oyster space, right? We're an oyster bar where people can enjoy themselves and relax and be a part of something that sat as like a casual counterpart to 12, right? So that was a thought, because you have a lot of other spaces. There are a couple of other spaces that we highly respect in the city that exist near here, right? We have Eventide, which has lines around the block, but that just shows how there is a density that outmatches what Eventide can accomplish in seating on a nightly basis, right? You have the shop at Island Creek, right, which is located on Washington Avenue. And they do a great job, but they only do oysters and tin fish and a very small amount of garmage, which is cold station produced items. Does that make sense? So it is a pop-up. They are putting out quite a bit of volume, but it's not the place to go to if you're looking for a full meal, a full and complete meal, including prepared foods, right? Then we look across the water. Sopo Seafoods is someone that we procure seafood from. They're a space in South Portland that's informal, that's casual, that acts as a marketplace. They also have maybe a little bit more of a footprint. There's some heated items like a crab cake that exists there and some soups, but they are very similar in their composition to the shop at Island Creek. And one of the things that I would say is that at Eventide, is subtly, for those of you who don't recognize it, an Asian restaurant, in that almost all of the flavor profiles that they have on that menu have a lot of provenance from Asia, right? At Eventide, the other thing that I would say is their portion sizes are very much built almost as if they're tapas-like. So they are smaller portions that are meant to be shared. So it's not a traditional, you have a main course and, it feels like you're going to have a lot of flavors that hit the table, right? So knowing into all of those things, when we decide how we go about doing something. We're never going to try and copycat someone else's success. We're going to respect what they've done, hope to add to the conversation by providing something slightly different. Okay. So with Douro, what we said is, where can we go with all of these pieces of information that we're collecting from what I just noted with you? There's also quite a bit of seafood that exists along Commercial Street, right? That seafood sits in a particular vein of New England fare. New England fare has, there's some things that feel like fun, summertime novelty, fried food, etc. There's also some things in which there's a coating or a breading or a clam chowder or things like that, right? So there's some density to the dishes. What we were looking for, because we didn't find it as much, although there's some places that we really respect, like Scales, etc., is that there wasn't a space that was more or less seafood devoted that had a sort of simplicity towards the ingredients, where the primary focus was on the quality of those ingredients. And one of the ways that I think about that, like sort of dining experiences, if you are fortunate enough to travel to Europe at some point and you're on the Mediterranean, and let's say you are invited to someone's home, oftentimes you will eat really simply with them, but it would be incredibly delicious. So it might be a whole fish. It might be a beautiful salad with incredible ingredients that are like the prime. It might be some side dishes that go alongside it. Everything being very clean from a flavor profile. And also the star of the show is the ingredients, not the preparation necessarily. Does that make sense? And that's what we wanted to create, because we didn't feel like there was a strong presence of that, and that felt like something that we could occupy. So in doing so, we looked at routes between Portugal and European spaces. And one thing that was really, or routes between Maine and European spaces. One thing that was really interesting to us was Portugal, for a couple of different reasons. Portugal and Maine are roughly the same geographic size. They reside on the Atlantic, and they have an intricate tie to the tin fishing industry. So there's a historical industry that's tied to it in both spaces, right? So there's some parallels there that are an interesting conversation, because I think we mentioned yesterday, we're not looking for something to just be plopped down and just sell it. We're looking for there to be like a reason why we've chosen to do something. The other thing that was interesting when we did research was that we found that the oysters, which we talked about before being like the driving interest of like what we're doing, oysters were actually in the 1970s, there were European grafts that came over that create some of the harvests that we now cultivate here. So there's a relationship even in the varietals of the products that are sold here. There's a conversation between Europe and here. So there's some real, authentic, genuine legs between the two. Does that make sense to everyone?
Is there not a Portuguese historic neighborhood in Stead as well? I just looked that up.
I don't know it, but that would be really interesting if you found out information on it and came back to the group. Yeah, please let us know. That would be really interesting to find out that there was more legs on anything. What I do know is that in this area through the Cape, there are quite a few of Portuguese settlers that have come through. So it wouldn't surprise me if there had been at some point people who had passed through or who had settled. These are words that inform. I always like there to be inspiration points behind like what we're doing or how we're looking to create something. So the space that we wanted to create, just so everybody knows, we didn't want it to be formal. We also wanted it to be relaxed and enjoyable. The entire idea was meant so that this space is meant to be fun. So convivial is a word that means friendly, lively, enjoyable. We don't want it to be quiet. We don't want it to be pristine. We don't want it to be serious. We don't want it to be a space in which people have to be rigid or structured in any way. It's meant to be an enjoyable social space, okay? Concourse. Concourse is a word. Concourse, does everybody here recognize that? Has anybody here participated in train travel in any way, shape, or form? Have you heard that word, concourse? Okay. So concourse has it has a connotation that is built around a space in which multiple people are using it for multiple destination points, right? So the idea is that in a concourse, if we're taking it and looking at it in the restaurant scape, we wanted to be able to provide an experience for multiple users. If somebody wants to have a drink with their girlfriend and come in and sit at the bar, they could do so. If somebody wants to get oysters and get a glass of wine before they go over to 12, they could do so. If somebody wants to come in and have an entire meal of it, they could do so. There's really no right way to interact with the space, and we wanted the menu and the space to be able to adapt to that sort of informality of use so that people didn't feel like they were confined in any way, shape, or form. Does that make sense? Okay. And then harbor. We exist on a harbor. A harbor is also a gathering place. It's a port of refuge. It is meant to be a space where people can relax and confer and stop on their journey points. And that is also, from a perspective of what we're trying to do, very similar of what we want. We want a bit of escapism inside the space. Does that make sense? A bit of escapism from reality. And then at the end, this is something that was important to us, that the restaurant is a love letter to the fishermen, oyster farms, and seafaring people of the Atlantic coast. Does that make sense? Okay. Design intent. So this was all what we laid out. So myself and Shelby Bergall, who is the vice president of development here, we did the interior design of the space without an interior designer. And one of the intents that we had, this gives some areas of influence and a desire of what we wanted to replicate. So one of the things, if you go around the world, right, you will find that seafood spaces, often informal, will typically have white tiles, often subway tiles, and they will have light blonde wood. And some of that's done for sanitation purposes, but you could go to Amsterdam, you could go to South America, you could go to California. You'll often find a room covered in tile, super clean, minimalist, simple, right? And that is where they sell their goods. Even Sopo Seafood has kind of like a white and simple interior. What we wanted to do was to take that inspiration of like classic seafood house that's informal, that sits somewhere near water, and we wanted to reinterpret it. And one of the ways to reinterpret it was to pull in tile work because it's synonymous with Portugal from a design perspective. So what you saw downstairs on that countertop, those are hand-painted tiles from an atelier. So it's a tile house in Lisbon, in the Lisbon region of Portugal. And so those come from a lineage of azulejos. Azulejos are blue tiled surfaces. So you can see on the exterior of this building right here, and you can also see in this space, they were often hand painted and they formed a very distinctive Portuguese style that was used for generations and is very synonymous with that particular country and what it's been doing. Oftentimes you'll see some sort of mural and it's done in tile work. And so we wanted to pull some of that in. So as opposed to being flat white tiles, we wanted there to be a bit of color and a bit of pulling Portugal into the space. Then what we wanted was a space that was energetic. When you plan restaurants, I have always been under the belief that bars should be close to the entryway because bars fill up sooner than tables do, and they create an arrival experience because who here wants to walk into an empty, dead space? Anybody? Probably not. People like there to be energy. They like there to be life. So one of the conversations that we'll be having when we do the hosting is, let's say we only have 3 tables that come in at the beginning of the shift. What I think of hosting is curating the room so that it feels full. So I don't necessarily seat because this station has been sat and this station isn't been sat. I seat so that when somebody walks into this space, it's appealing for them to stay at, right? So if you have people who are laughing and joking and celebrating, you put them at the front of the room because they're going to create an energy that's lively. If I have two people, let's say I come from the restaurant and I'm sleepy and I'm jet lagged and I feel like I'm annoyed with my partner, don't sit me at the front of the room, right? Because of the fact that that's going to be what people encounter. So it's that sort of thing that we'll think about in how we're seating the dining room a lot of the times is how it feels, right? Energetically. Less about, just rotating and where the tables are, and more about, in my mind, what I always tell to hosts that I work with, it's almost like curating a dinner party every night. It's like, where do you seat everybody so that they're going to have the maximum amount of entertainment? Okay. So we wanted there to be a bar upon arrival that felt engaging. That rounded bar felt unique to the area and didn't feel like it was something that had been done here. So we chose to focus on that as the arrival experience. And then we focused on inside that dining room having as many good seats as possible. So if you are sitting, we didn't do a full open kitchen because that can be really stressful for the kitchen and it can also be difficult from a storage perspective and all these other things. So instead, what we did is we created a picture window into the kitchen. So you could be sitting at the counter with a friend and having conversations and still watching the chefs put together food and be able to watch that sort of choreography happening. You could sit in front of the raw bar. We can have a true raw bar set up with someone filling it and staging it. And that could be a point of entertainment for you. You could be sitting at the bar counter and be watching the bartenders work and engage with either dispensing drinks or conversing with the guests who are at the bar. Or you could be seated at one of those peninsulas and be looking out at the waterfront, right? So we wanted there to be very few seats in which there wasn't a good seat or there wasn't any entertainment available to you, right? Again, increasing the energy level of the room. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? And the idea was that we would have these moments that would be playful, such as food as art. So the host stand is taking conservas, which are tinned fish from Portugal, and using them as artwork to create a host stand that's colorful and vibrant. Does that make sense? Kind of the thought process behind it? Girl, I don't know if you're trying to. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, there we go. I can also read it for you. I'll do the legwork for you if you can't, okay? But the idea was to create an easy and approachable Portuguese influenced seafood restaurant in an energetic space. So that is one of the things that I would describe us as. We are a Portuguese inspired seafood restaurant, right? Which means that sometimes there will be dishes that are literally taken from Portugal, but often there might be things that are inspired by some of the flavor preparations. We're not saying that we always are going to be literally by the book. There are some times where we will have our interpretation of something. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? Tucked into the corner of 110 Thames on Portland's Harbor, it's a casual restaurant dedicated to serve its Portuguese-inspired seafood in a lively atmosphere. So simple, right? Doesn't need to be complicated, but everybody in this room has to understand it. And the reason why I go through the brand with you is that I think in very few circumstances in restaurants are you given all of the subtext. You're just given an idea of what the menu is. It's an Italian restaurant, and this is how you order. It's this, it's that. I'm not expecting, and I would hate for you guys to go into like a 20-minute diatribe to a guest who probably doesn't care about all the details for it. But when you know more, you are more confident, right? And so it allows you to walk into a situation and not feel like you're struggling to come up with words to be able to describe what you're doing, because it feels comfortable because you know all of the deeper level of reasons of why things were created. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? Okay. The menu, this was the energy that we wanted it to feel. So the idea being we'd have a menu, you can see on the right-hand side, That's a menu that reflects like a classic British seafood space. They always have like very clear boxes and areas of menu placement that it feels very comfortable how to visually read something and where to put energy into and what you would order from and how and why, right? The food is meant to feel softly staged in a way in which it's not rigid or harsh, but still feels very pretty and colorful, right? And the cocktails are meant to feel bright, vibrant, feel like they're summertime, and the energy is meant to feel that way too. So the idea is, let's say all of you save up, decide to go with friends and go somewhere, and you're out on a boat off the cool coast of some place in Europe. We want the energy of the space to feel like that. So the interior should feel like eternal summertime. It should feel escapism, even during the winter. It should be brightly colored. The music should be loud. It should be fun. And that should be reflective in your service. All of you here, which we're going to get into in a bit, oftentimes what you're not told is what the service style should feel like. So for example, we operate a restaurant in Cape Elizabeth that is called the Good Table. And at that space, we have told the team that we want it to feel softer, more earnest, more approachable, almost Midwest-like, where it's wholesome, right? Inside 12, we have talked to that team about being experts, but not being rigid or formal, so that you are approachable and can have a conversation with someone instead of intimidating them or talking down to them, right? Which feels uncomfortable. At this space, we want it to feel fun, easygoing, and approachable and personality driven. Does that make sense? Okay. So that gives you a bit of idea of how we originally planned for things. This will go through the uniforms a little bit later, but this is original inspiration for the uniform. Something muted with there being like a pop of color somewhere. We did not decide on those shoes, so don't everybody get stressed out all the way because we know that everybody like hates the shoe being decided for them, which we will not do. We will give you a vein of shoe or a color scheme that you can choose, and then you can choose your own because some of you have high arches, some of you have flat feet. I don't want to get involved with your podiatrist, okay? The rest of this gives you some ideas for how this should appear itself. So
Is this a front and back of house uniform?
no, the back of the house will always be in a separate uniform that's based on chef's whites, right? But there will be a baseball hat that you'll have in addition to it. So this gives an idea of how it might feel. You will see the plates. So we've gone in a different direction than this, but we have used blue as a color that ties us to the plate. So you'll notice hand-painted blue bands on a lot of the plates that we've chosen. Those are from Jono Pandolfi, someone who works in the Hudson Valley and creates kind of rough-hewn clay that feels like it's handmade with a highly polished interior. So you'll get to see those. Glassware, we've chosen things that feel like they're a little bit of a throwback to the 1960s mod era, where it's goblets that are more geometric as opposed to them being rounded or feeling more modern. So it feels like it's a little bit more playful. Cutlery is meant to be like super clean, simple. And then there's moments like this is the cataplana, which is going to be one of our tableside hero dishes that feels like there's a little bit of like a showmanship to it coming out to the table because of the piece that it's served inside. But this gives you a bit of the feeling of how it should feel inside the space. Okay, does that make sense? Inside, if you were to look and you'll go through a tour of the space today, there are two bump outs that are staged for retail moments that exist in the corridor in the main dining room where we were all seated yesterday, walking to the private dining rooms that you have in the back of the restaurant. And in that, we plan on putting cookbooks from chefs that we are inspired by, both classic and modern. We plan on doing some items with Brown Trading that we appreciate as far as products, whether it's olive oils or it's items that could be procured. And then some playful like ceramic items, some textiles, things like that, so that there's an element of like, if you were to come into this space, you could kind of peruse it as an aspirational brand that is associated with things that you could take home with yourself. Okay. So just keep in mind that there will be things that theoretically our guests, if they're waiting or as they're leaving, they could choose to take something home with them that reminds them of the style or the energy of the restaurant. Okay. And we are looking a lot at local vendors. There's artwork that's been commissioned and already done in the interior. And our focal point was on finding people that we respected who did certain crafts, who then executed versions or interpretations of things in different areas. And we will be listed on a local art sort of roundup in order for people to understand that they could come and see local artwork that's been commissioned, whether it's through mural work, whether it's through tile work, whether it's through silk installations inside the space. Okay. This is the schematic plan. So this is pretty much what was executed. So you can see right here, the idea that we had is that we also wanted, has anybody been to a big restaurant that's really large and you walk in and when it's empty, it feels super empty? Mm-hmm. We know what that feels like. So we don't want that. We wanted a space, even though there's been a big push towards like open floor plans, we wanted a space that could feel busy on a Monday or Tuesday in January, as well as a Friday night in August. Okay. So the idea was in this space, with the bar being here, raw bar being here, these peninsulas being here, the host stand being located right here, it draws your eye in this direction. So you feel like you are directly looking at this as the main restaurant component, right? These rooms have a couple of different options. They have the ability to be auxiliary seating, so they could act as extensions of the dining room for us on busy days, Saturdays, Sundays, brunches, busy dinner shifts, things like that. Or we can utilize them as private dining spaces. And we put in a divider between the two rooms so that you can host two events simultaneously, with both of them having egress into the rooms so that you don't have to worry about walking through one room to service the other room, right? We even put in, there's a little bartending station that exists right here. It's what you would find at a hotel, like kind of like a closet bar that's not meant to be available to the public. But if you have an event that's going on and you're quite busy, you can staff either a bartender or a bar back at that space and allow for the main bar to not get slammed so that everybody takes forever to receive their cocktails. Instead, you can separate that private space and the main bar so they don't conflict with one another and they don't kind of collapse together. And the same was thought with the interiors, so that, let's say, I'm a host who's working a Friday night over here and there's a private event inside this space. I can let those guests know in advance that they're going to be entering in through this door so that I don't have thousands of people who are walking in here and it's impossible for me to be able to seat the table for two that's getting lost in the table for 40 that's come in, right? Does that make sense to everybody? So it's just, we wanted to think, we cared about design. We also cared about operational logistics for you guys so that it is functional as well as appealing to somebody who's sitting inside of the spaces. And those back rooms are not designed as if they were private dining rooms. They're designed as if they were dining rooms so that they are as appealing as this space. Because who here is super attracted to, if you were booking a private event somewhere, having it be at a hotel with just like white walls? Probably not, right? Now people are more interested in being in a space that feels like it's alive and it has a design intent and it feels more comfortable and it feels like it's tied to something with legitimately good food. So we wanted to make sure that we had private dining options inside the space. Okay. All right, so that gives you a bit of information with regards to the Douro deck. I'm going to go through a brand manifesto a little bit with you guys, and I'm just going to briefly read through this. And I recognize that some of these things, and I'll try and increase slightly. Not all of these things you do need to know. Like this is something that you could just listen to as opposed to taking notes in. This is the sort of thing that's important for me to have fleshed out with the marketing team so we're portraying it correctly. Does that make sense? So, for example, we talked about the brand pillars yesterday of PhD, which there are three of them: a culinary lens, a sense of place, and modern service classic values. So those are represented inside the space with fresh coastal Portuguese cuisine rooted in simplicity and quality, a sense of place, an open invitation to Portland's working waterfront, right? And modern service classic values, a casual ease with elevated attention, okay? The brand position. Douro is a relaxed all-day seafood restaurant located on Portland Harbor with vibrant, unpretentious energy and sweeping views of the waterfront. It brings flavors and conviviality of coastal Portugal to Maine through thoughtful design, fresh ingredients, and inclusive spirit. Anchored by a wine pub mindset and a playful cocktail program, Douro is Portland, where Portland meets Portugal. Two things that I'm starting to introduce to both of you. Carrie mentioned her wine list. One of the things that was interesting for us, European wine culture is very different than American wine culture. American wine culture is often pretentious and about someone who knows something, and then often an audience that feels uncomfortable asking questions about wine. European wine culture is table wine. It's informal. It's more about conversation and ease of socialization than it is about like having to feel intimidated by the product. And so we wanted to quantify that in saying that space was meant to be more of a wine pub than a wine bar in the way that it should feel, right? And with that, so the way that your wine list, which I'll show you the menus in a bit, but the way that it'll break itself out is that you will have a menu that should be easy for guests to navigate on their own, and also easy for you to navigate if you are taking them through it, right? And in it, it will have 30, let's say we have 30 bottles of wine. Guests can have them all by the glass. So that means that there's the ability to have a half glass of wine, right? For those people who don't want to indulge that much or want like a half a glass for the road, but don't want to have a full glass, that's an option. Or want to create their own kind of tasting menu and pairings or whatever they want to do, don't want to commit to a particular flavor, that's an option for them, right? There's a full glass of wine, right? Which doubles that portion. There is a large glass of wine, which is a little bit more than that. So it's roughly larger by a third so that people can indulge if they just want to have a glass but don't want to go to a bottle or a carafe or they're on their own. Then there's the option of having a carafe or having the full bottle so that people can really slice and dice the wine list as they so choose. It should not feel formalized. It should not feel forced. It should feel easy to experiment and to try things and not as if you have to commit to anything that you may not love. Does that make sense to everybody here? So the idea of what we're selling is this wine pub where wine is approachable. It's meant to be easy. The way that the wine list reads is, if you're panicked and you're trapped with a guest, you'll have your wine matrices in each of the side stations. But let's say you're there, in the back of your head, top wine in either white, skin contact, or red is going to be your lightest bodied, right? Bottom wine is going to be your fullest bodied so that you can navigate somebody through without feeling intimidated. And the same is true for them, right? The idea should be that they shouldn't have to feel like they have to ask somebody's help in order to be able to make a decision. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? Cocktails. Everybody, there's some really great high-performing cocktail spaces in town. There's Cuties that recently opened. There's also Blythe and Burroughs, and Poppy. What I would say is we are looking to do cocktails that are thought of from almost a culinary perspective, where there's a recipe, there's a brief, they all work together in a certain way. And then when you look at them, we want to, at Douro, have a big footprint for non-alcoholic cocktails. We call them non-alcoholic cocktails because we don't want them to feel like half-assed cocktails. So mocktails implies that they're not real, right? In our minds, they are real. We put as much effort and energy into them. So the way that your cocktails program will work is you will have a couple large format cocktails that are fun, that are meant to be tableside experiences. Then you'll have a smaller proportion of cocktails on the menu. So let's say you have 5 to 6 static cocktails. Those cocktails guests can get either in their alcoholic versions or non-alcoholic version, right? And so everybody can participate. Again, I told you yesterday a value of ours is inclusivity. And so we're looking to bring that to the next level with regards to the cocktail program too. Does that make sense?
Are there non-alcoholic spirits or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you'll get a lot of that when we go through cocktail conversations and beverage training. You'll go through all of the ingredients that are based in alcohol and also non-alcoholic, right? All right, differentiators. Differentiators are what we talked about before. What makes you unique? What is your selling points? What are things that make you special, right? European simplicity over New England tradition. While many Portland restaurants are rooted in traditional New England fare and preparation, Douro introduces the easy elegance of coastal Portugal, bright ingredient-driven food served with relaxed precision. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? The wine pub. Every wine is a glass wine, available by the half glass, large pour, carafe, or bottle. The experience is casual, exploratory, and communal. It's wine for any moment, not just special ones. Okay? Multiple experiences, one spirit. Whether it's cocktails and oysters at the bar, a shared bottle with friends, or an aspirational dinner at golden hour, Douro flexes seamlessly between moods, always approachable, always transportative. So does that make sense? That goes along with what I kind of talked about earlier with you about how different people should be able to experience it in whatever way they want. And then some of the things about personality. Douro is meant to be effortless, warm, curious, stylish, and sun-drenched. It is not meant to be fussy. It's not meant to be dated. It's not meant to be exclusionary. It's not meant to be rigid, and it's not meant to be over-designed. Does that make sense? Okay. The tone of voice. So if you see us on social, if you see how we're trying to portray our imagery when we do photography, we have our first photo shoot next week. It's meant to be sunny, effortless, and cultured. Those are the 3 points of brand tone of voice. When you create a brand tone of voice, remember we talked about odds being helpful from a feng shui perspective. You're typically going to look for 3. You look for 3. You see that we created 3 brand pillars for PHG as a parent brand that would translate into each of the brands that comes out of PHG. Tone of voice, you would also come up with 3 that could exist from it. So again, sunny, effortless, cultured. And I think the rest of it you can see from a brand values perspective. Expert, we bring a deep love of food, wine, and design with a focus on substance over spectacle. Nimble, we see opportunity and simplicity and create layered experience with surprising ease. Open, we're curious, experimental, and pretentious, generous with our knowledge and our table, and inclusive. We believe a great restaurant welcomes everyone, wine novice or expert, cocktail drinker or not, local or visitor. Does that make sense? Okay. Are you all still awake?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we go into visual identity of the brand. So there's a behind the scenes brand, which we just went through, which gives a lot of bones of how you talk about it, how it expresses itself. And then there's a way that visually the public would identify with it. And that's what we're going to go through right here. So you see Douro, one of our catchstones is Atlantic Spirit, Portuguese soul. Okay. This is just a brand guideline. So this is what the marketing team looks at to make sure that they don't diverge from the way that it's visually portrayed. So Portugal meets Portland. Douro is a relaxed all-day seafood restaurant located in Portland Harbor with a vibrant, unpretentious energy and sweeping views of the waterfront. Brings the flavors and conviviality of coastal Portugal to Maine through thoughtful design, fresh ingredients, and an inclusive spirit. Does that make sense to everybody? Does it kind of follow the same line of what we've been talking about, like previous to now? Then we have a brand identity, colors. So your brand colors, lemon yellow, which feels kind of European. Like if you were looking at like let's say you looked at a beach and you were, studying a resort, you might find the pinstripes that exist that are sitting in that, you'll see the wallpaper has them inside the retail spaces that feel like they're slightly European based. You'll see a dark blue, a pink, and a light blue, all meant to be not self-serious, not super young, but also feel like slightly more playful. Does that make sense? So the master logo looks like this. So what we've done with our designer is we focused on lettering that felt hand-drawn as opposed to just being typography that was very rigid and forced. So you'll notice subtle imperfections in each of the lettering for the final Douro logo. This gives a mock-up of how it might look in pink and deep blue and light blue and in yellow. You'll probably never see it in that black color. I don't like that, but whatever. Then this just gives them guidance on what to do and what to not do. Girasol is our leading font. So Girasol ties to, if you go to Lisbon and you travel there, you will find that the street signs are actually tile installations on the side of buildings. So that's where you would look for your notes as to which street you were located on. And this gives an example of, you would find this on an upper facade on the first floor of a building, right? On a corner. So this font that leads Douro's main logo comes from a historical reference that you would find inside a Portuguese city. Does that make sense? Then on the flip side of things, you'll find Futura, which is the copy that's meant to be more modern. So the idea being that we're showing modern and classic living side by side with one another. Our brand visual assets, you've probably seen these in some of our social ads, etc., but they represent tiles in different colors that can be applied in different ways. This gives an example of how they could be expressed on a singular background, right? This gives an example of like the sort of imperfection that will be applied to the logo face so that it feels like it has a little bit of age to it. This gives an example of if we were to produce a coffee cup, what it might look like. The business cards, which we have samples of, so you could see those. And then this gives an example of the menus and what they look like. So I'll increase this and scroll down.
Do any of those designs specifically mean anything? Like,
Or
like anything like in Portugal, like
which designs?
like those, just like the
Tile
tile
works?
Yeah.
So if you go to a major city in Portugal and throughout the country, you'll find that the facades of building, because of Moorish influence, Moorish populations were ancient Northern Africans that flooded the Iberian Peninsula and created, there's like a mix of Christian and Islamic influences there. So that geometry that you would typically associate and tile work, which you would typically associate with Islamic artwork, is a lot at play in the Iberian Peninsula, whether you're in Spain or Portugal. So those designs are a reference to something that is very specifically up there, but there are plays on it that are specific to us.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely.
This menu, I'm really having a tough time of being able to get you to where you need to be to see the entire thing, but you can kind of see what it looks like. So you have main courses, you have sides, you have these boxes that direct you to specific spaces. You have places where we know snacks and hero dishes, etc. You'll definitely see more of this, so don't worry if you can't see a ton of it right now. And then on the flip side of things, you can see we've done little caricatures for each of the different ways that you might get a glass. So you have half glass, full glass, large glass, carafe, and bottle, and then all the different categories of it. And we've gone deeper so that there's descriptors that are listed in 3 different categories for whites, for reds, etc. So again, it's easier for you to direct people to a category, but we'll go through a bunch of that. So don't feel like you have to know too much about it. And then this just gives you a bit of what the back of the menu looks like. So
And are we not doing QR code menus? Are we not doing QR code menus?
that isn't a focus right now.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
those are, take away from the personal experience, I always find.
Yeah.
And your phone. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, we will have physical menus for you guys, okay? So that gives you a bit of information, and this is, we're figuring out whether it's cocktail napkins that this is expressed in, or whether it's coasters. Right now, this is being produced, so we have samples coming for us, but this just shows you something that you might be delivering when you drop off drinks to the table, okay? So does this help to understand what the space is meant to convey?
How did you come up with the name?
Yeah,
Oh,
great question.
wonderful, great question. So naming exercise is typically what you do is you choose a couple different routes. You could say, and what we chose, the 3 routes that we chose were people who were historically associated with the tin fish industry inside Portugal. So that might be, a first name of someone, right? Or a last name of someone. We looked at those and created a short list of that. We created, famous figures from Portugal and created a list of that. And then we created geographical regions as the third kind of route. And you look at all of them and you say, what makes sense to you? What doesn't? Some things that you always want to look at. So I always tell you about this. My dog's name is Margot. I was telling you that before because I opened a Californian restaurant in Amsterdam, California-inspired restaurant in Amsterdam that was meant to be like kind of like 1970s inspired. And so that time period, a lot of the names were like Margot and, Celia and things like that. There was like a different like priority on names that were associated with California at that time, particularly Southern California. And so I was really hot on Margot being the name of the restaurant because I thought that's kind of cool, whatever. So then I sat down with my Dutch friends and had them repeat Margot back to me, which then became Margot. And then I decided that that was not going to be, in fact, the name for the restaurant because it really didn't sound great. And what we wanted was for it to sound easy off the tongue of somebody who was in Amsterdam or from the US visiting there so that pronunciations were similar. It would be really easy to do a word that people in Portland have no clue how to pronounce. And so what we wanted was something that was easy for anybody to be able to pronounce when they're verbalizing it. So that was a consideration for us in all the names that we chose, right? And secondarily, we wanted it tied to something. We found that an interesting pocket was Douro because Douro is associated with the Douro Valley. It's a space outside of Porto, the second largest city in Portugal that is also close to the wine growing region and the tin fishing industry. So it is a geographical location that is tied to both wine and food culture. And we also wanted for people to not screw up the name every single time that they tried to say it or feel uncomfortable saying the name. Does that make sense? So that's how we got to Douro. Okay, so I talked at you a lot. Tell me your thoughts about brand. Tell me your thoughts about like how this interprets, what you take away from this. Does this make sense to you? You know, does this now make sense when you think about all the things that you are barraged with on a daily basis, like how, what they're looking to do with that sort of brand storytelling? Does that make sense?
If a customer were to ask, like, is this a Portuguese restaurant? Would we correct them and say that it's a seafood restaurant that's inspired by Portugal? Or are we leaning into Portuguese restaurant?
I would say that we are inspired by Portugal. So we've never claimed to be like 100% authentic because this is interpreting a lot of the dishes that would exist in Portugal, but it serves as like, that is like a North Star for the chefs in the kitchen. That makes sense?
I backpacked in Europe when I was like 22 for about 4 months. I spent a lot of time in that area and I think you guys did a good job.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's if you guys get to go, it's such a cool region. You know, it's also nice for Americans because they're really good at dealing with English speakers who don't know how to speak Portuguese. Unfortunately, most of us know Spanish, which is not the same as Portuguese. And in fact, it'll confuse the hell out of you if you try and speak Spanish inside a Portuguese country. But it really is a beautiful area. It's fun. It like feels like it is something that feels like it's playful. And something that's not done already inside Portland, right? Like we didn't want to do something like I told you that just feels like it's copycatting what somebody else's success might be. The other thing to know, which is something that you will not tell people, but we at our heart of the direction that we're going. So, you know, myself, I brought up Colin Wyatt, who you've met, who is our culinary director who worked at some really elevated French restaurants in New York City prior to coming here. Georgia Macon, who is our executive pastry chef for the group, worked at Tartine in San Francisco, and studied at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. And so she has, all of us have this kind of European background in what we would produce. 12 is not out there openly stating that it's a French restaurant, but is it a neo bistro? A bistro is a neighborhood spot. And if you were to go into Paris, instead of these formal spaces, you'd find spaces that feel like they're much more modern, feel like they're a little bit more, like they're not meant to be pristine temples, etc., but they're meant to interpret food in like a really informal way, but still have the same craftsmanship that existed there before. That is what 12 is meant to feel like on the interior of it. Does that make sense to everybody? So background is the direction that we're going. There's actually a European bent to a lot of like the culinary talent that we have or their experience, right? And so that also helps to inform kind of why directionally we've gone in that space. What other questions do you have?
The menu as a whole is going to stay relatively the same regardless of season. There won't be much fluctuation between winter and summer.
I wouldn't say that that will be accurate. I will say that you'll probably have, especially in the raw bar, a lot of proteins that will stay similar. I think for a lot of the rest of the restaurant, we'll probably have the same thing that you would expect from Maine. You know, our growing season is short and not as long as other spaces. We're not California. We can't pretend that we are. So as opposed to like 4 clear seasonal changes that you would get if you were to be in Southern California, you will probably see that there are like 3 turns of the menu, right? And a lot of it will be focused on what produce is in season, right? So it might be that you have similar fish, but the garnish might change because of the fact that what we find in season is different. And then you might have some vegetable dishes because we talked before about the fact that the menu while our focus is on seafood, there's quite a bit that can satisfy somebody who has an appetite for meat, or somebody who is looking for a vegetable dish, right? And doesn't diverge from that. You know, a lot of people, when they think of seafood restaurants who don't eat seafood, it's a scary place because there's not many options for them. We don't want that same feeling for this menu. Does that make sense?
I would also say that seafood is extremely seasonal, so.
Yep.
You can't get Atlantic mackerel in the middle of the winter, but we have incredible Atlantic mackerel in the middle of the summer, and we get awesome squid that gets caught off Cape Elizabeth in the middle of the summer. So I haven't spoke with Chef too much about the menu, but the seafood in Maine is extremely seasonal, so I guarantee that would be
One change.
Reflected on the menu, absolutely. And even in some of the things, that you'll see, like and I'll leave this for chefs to talk about with you. But when you get to winter, you expect to see more root vegetables, you expect to see more mushroom, you expect to see citrus and desserts, those are the time periods that those sorts of things come into the horizon. So you'll see a movement of that, right? So the menu, while it'll be formatted very similar and will feel like it's stable enough for people to be like, I recognize what I'm coming back for, there will be movement in the menu.
Got it.
I don't know if this was already mentioned, but is the wine list specific to Portugal?
So there is a primary focus on the Iberian Peninsula, so Spanish and Portuguese. There's a little bit of a French influence because Americans are terribly snobbish about wanting champagne and don't like cava and et cetera to celebrate in the same way. But we're going to have, that is the primary focus, is things that would be exploratory and a little bit outside the norm for people to be able to enjoy. But one of the ways that we will describe this to you that Carrie is planning on is making it easy for you. So if you have somebody who's looking for a California Chardonnay, this is the wine that you direct them to. If you have someone who's looking to have a meat-based meal and would typically order a Cabernet Sauvignon, this is what you would go towards, right? So that when that person says, I typically get this, and they're confused about the menu, you can immediately direct them to a glass and you don't feel like it takes a ton of brain power to be able to guide them there. Does that make sense? It's meant to be easy.
There's Sherry's and vermouths on the
Any other thoughts? Questions?
I've never had the luxury of traveling Europe before, but so I could be completely wrong about this, but my understanding of European wine culture is that a lot of the accessibility comes from it being quite a bit cheaper than it is in the United States.
I think it's a different approach as well. I don't think that there's this mysticism around wine in wine-growing regions because of the fact that it's a part of daily life. So what you see is that often, whether you're in Paris or you're in, somewhere in Spain, Madrid or something like that, you'll have table wines available, right? And not everything is about it being the most expensive bottle. Americans, we tend to get into the categories of this is really nice and this is really, we put it on a pedestal in a way that I don't think Europeans do. Yes, they have some great reach bottles that are expensive for them, but in general, the approach is quite different. It's every day as opposed to feeling like it's special occasion based.
I personally love to drink wine with dinner, but a big obstacle for me is that I work for a living. Wine is, are we like bring it to a more accessible level there where we're trying to?
We're always going to, and this is a pricing strategy for us for both the regular food menu as well as the beverage menu. We're never going to look to be like price leaders in categories because of the fact that we do want to be inclusive. That means that we'll try and look at what everybody else is doing and not exceed what they're doing and make it as available as possible. There's some things that are difficult for us with regards to going super low. Just everything's been inflated over the course of the last 5 years and tariffs come into play, et cetera. But in general, there is a premium on accessibility of price point with this, especially by the glass.
I would say just to add to that point, like the accessibility part, like we're talking about, you have the 3-ounce pours, you have the 5-ounce pours, you have the 7-ounce pours. So there's a lot of wiggle room within the price range there that to make it more accessible and more everyday as well.
I do love the taste of wine, but I also like the feeling of wine, you know?
Oh, you're trying to get right.
I don't think you're alone.
Just to, as we're talking about accessibility, and I like that you brought up like escapism when you're talking about the harbor. And so are all the cocktails going to be available NA?
So all of them, less the large formats. So the large formats will be very specific. Like our 2 large formats are, and I'm ruining Matt's conversation, but he'll make it much more fun for you. We have 2 large format cocktails that are meant to be fun tableside, one of which is a vermouth spritz that's served tableside. The other of which is a pancha. A pancha is a drink that's comes from an island that's associated with Portugal, Madeira. And in it, basically, it's like a tropical fruit drink. And so there's a specific presentation point to that as well. Everything else, all of your singular cocktails will be available in both the non-alcoholic and alcoholic version of them. Anything that I got wrong with that, Matt?
Plus.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Any other questions? These are good questions. Any thoughts? You hate it? Sucks? You happy with it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We're like, what is that, 25% energetic towards it? I'll take it. Okay. So that first conversation about brand was one that we wanted to have with you, right? Then I believe, what was the second portion of this morning?
Fact sheet.
Fact sheet, that's over to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna allow somebody else to pick this one up. And do you want me to leave this? Okay.